We begin today the Gemara on Daf Chafei Amud Aleph. We're holding the second line from the top of the Amud. The Gemara is discussing b'nigeya to animals or fish that you're going to be using on Yontif, that it has to be designated from before Yontif or trapped from before Yontif in order that it shouldn't be muktzah. Sagt the Gemara, Amar Rabbe bar Avona, Amar Rav, Hasoicher, Amas Hamayim, Me'erev Yomtiv. If someone plugged up a canal of water from before Yontif, Ulamachar, tomorrow in the morning on Yontif, Hishkim umatza badagim. He wakes up in the morning and he finds that there are fish that are there inside. Mutarin. So these fish are allowed to be used on Yontif because he prepared them. He plugged it up before Yontif to be able to have these fish to eat on Yontif. Rav Chisda says based on this, Midivrei Rabbeinu, from the words of Rav, from our Rebbe Rav, Nilmaid we can learn out, Chaya shekinena bepardis, an animal that's a wild animal and it was nesting in a orchard. In other words, usually it's a wild animal, but here it came into an orchard. And as Rashi explains, over there in the orchard, it was giving birth for a baby. So that baby that's born over there in this orchard, einot tzricha zimun. You don't have to do any other action. You don't have to do anything to prepare it and designate it to be used on Yontif. Because this baby that's born there can't run away, can't go anywhere, so it's sort of stuck in that area. Just like Rav said regarding a canal of water that's plugged up. And the fish are not going out, so too over here regarding a baby that's born in this orchard is not going anywhere, and therefore it's already prepared for you to use on Yontif. So on this the Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman said, Nofal Chaverin berav Revasa. Our friend Rav Chisda that said this halacha, he got himself involved in something which is a big machlokes. It's not necessarily the case. Rashi over here says that there were three friends that were Talmidim of Rav, were in Daf Chafei Amud Aleph. One was Rav Nachman, then Rav Huna, and Rav Chisda. These were the three Talmidim that were friends that learned by Rav. So when Rav Chisda said this, so Rav Nachman said about his friend that him making this comparison and saying this halacha, he's getting himself into a big argument. So the Gemara now brings another version of who said this, and the Gemara is soon going to explain why Rav Nachman felt that the comparison he made is not true. Ikeda Amri, there were others that said, Amar Rabbe bar Rav Huna. It was Rabbe, the son of Rav Huna, that he said, Medivrei Rabbeinu, that from the words of Rav, Nilmaid, we could learn out, Chaya, shekinena bepardes, an animal that is nesting in an orchard and gives birth there, Einat tzricha zimun. The baby that's born there does not have to be designated, just like Rav says that the fish that was stuck in a canal that you plugged up the water is already prepared for you for Yontif, the same thing over here. So according to this version, who said this? Not Rav Chisda, but Rabbe bar Rav Huna. And on this, Rav Nachman said, Nofal bar Chavrin berav Revaseh. The son of our friend, because Rav Huna was their friend, so over here was Rabbe bar Rav Huna, the son of our friend is getting himself involved in a subject which many are going to argue with him. And now the Gemara explains why what he said is not a good comparison. Hasam, in the case of an animal that's nesting in an orchard, loy ka'avid ma'isa. The person didn't do any action to prepare and designate the babies that are born there for Yontif. But hacha ka'avid ma'isa. By the case of plugging up a canal and the fish are stuck inside the canal, he did an action. He plugged up the canal for the fish to be stuck there. So because he did an action, therefore he designated it for Yontif. So how can you compare the two things? Then the Gemara brings also a Beitza.
You're saying that in order to have Seder, you have to have machshava?
No, the issue over here is not about Seder. The issue here is the muktzah.
So if you want to have Seder to use it, you have to have machshava?
It's not enough machshava. The Svar of the Gemara is saying you have to have a ma'isa. You have to have an action. You have to have actually plugged up, done something in order for it to be designated. Then the Gemara brings a Beitza, v'loi boy zimun. Is it not necessary that you should do an action to designate and prepare the animal that you could eat from it in Yontif? Tanya, we learned clearly in a Beitza, Chaya shekinena bepardes, an animal that's nesting in an orchard and giving birth there. Tzricha lezamen, you have to do an action to prepare it, to designate it, to eat from it in Yontif. And tzipur droir, we learned about this yesterday, when you have a bird that flies around and it's hard to capture it, tzarech liksher b'knafel, you have to tie it in its wings. And the reason is, kedei shalei tischalef be'ima, because this is a little bird. Rashi says these are birds that the mother and the children are small, and it's very difficult to distinguish between them. So in order to know which is the one that you designated for Yontif, so you have to make a sign. You put a bendel, something into the wings, so you know which one you prepared. And v'zu eidos she'idu mipi shmai v'avtalin. The Beitza says that this halacha was testimony that was given over in the name of Shmai and Naftalian. So it's a clear Beitza that says here that an animal that's inside a orchard, you have to do an action to designate it. You can't just rely on the fact that the babies are there and they're not going anywhere. To Yufte, so this refutes what Rav Chisda said, or according to another version, what Rabbi Baravona said. But now the Gemara asks on this from a different Beitza. In a different Beitza, it says the exact opposite. Mi boy zimun, the animals that are there in the orchard and they're stuck there, do you have to go and do an action to designate them? Vatanya, what we learned in a Beitza where it says, Amar Rab Shimon ben Elazar, Moedim Beishamai and Beisilul. Beishamai and Beisilul both agree. Al she'ez minon b'toich kain. If you designated and prepared birds that were inside their nest, umatza lefnei kain, and you found the birds in front of the nest, shasurin, you're not allowed to use them on Yom Tov because it's not the same ones that you prepared inside. But when is this true? B'yoini shayvech, the doves that live in a dovecote, or v'yoini aliyah, these doves that live in an attic, so they fly around and you don't know if it's the same ones that you designated. And also these birds that live in these jugs that are placed on the roofs of houses. Avol, avozim, but geese, v'tarnegailim, chickens, v'yoini hardisois, and these doves that are called hardisois. We learned it yesterday. Rashi says that they're domesticated, they come, they live with you. And v'chai yoshekineno bepardes, and this is what's negeya to us. The Beitza here clearly says, an animal that's nesting inside an orchard. Mutaren, you're allowed to use it on Yontif. Ve'ein sirichin zimun, you do not have to do any action to designate it. Very clear in the Beitza. And then the Beitza continues with other halachas. Tzipur droir, like we mentioned before, this bird, these small birds, tzricha liksher b'knafel, you have to make a sign by tying a bendel inside of its wings, kadei shalei tischalev b'ima, not to confuse the one that you prepared with its mother. They're both small. V'hamakusharim, v'hamenuanoim, and when you have birds that were tied already, which you did, in other words, you did an action to designate it, to prepare it before Yontif, and menuanoim, the ones that you already handled, you shook them, you took them before Yontif, bebeiris, they're in the pit, or bebatim, in the houses, or beshichin, and in another kind of ditch in the ground, or bemaitis, in caves, mutaren, they're all allowed to take them on Yontif. Or beilonais, but if they're in the trees, asurin. So even if you designated them, even if they were already shaken or you already tied something to them, it's still usher to take them from the tree. Over here there's a gzeira, shemayala v'yitlish. You might go climb up on the tree and you'll pull off a branch. Then Beitza finishes off with another halacha, which is not negeya to Yom Tov, but it's b'chlal halacha regarding these birds that you find out in the wild. If you see birds that there's a bendel tied to them, or that someone handled it already, wherever this bird might be, asurim mishum gezel. You're not allowed to take it because it's gzeila. Rashi explains that when it comes to something which is hefker, how you kind of something which is hefker, hagbah, you just pick it up and you kind it that way. So when you see that there's a bendel tied to it, or that someone already picked it up, he handled it, he did something, so he picked it up, he's kind it. So that it's not hefker anymore. So you're not allowed to take it. So, what's the point here? We see clearly in this Beitza, one of the things that it mentioned was that the chaya, that shekinah bepardis, you have an animal that's giving birth inside of an orchard, you don't have to do any action to designate it. It's already there, it's stuck there, and it's designated for Yontiv automatically. Amar Rav Nachman, so Rav Nachman answers, Lo kashya. There's no contradiction between the two Beitzas. Ha ba and ha be'ima. If you have the babies that are born and they can't run away, so they're designated, they're prepared for you to use for Yontif, so you don't have to do any additional action. But be'ima, when it comes to the mother, which is a big animal that could run away, it's in the orchard now, it's not designated at all, it's going to run away. Frag the Gemara, how could you say this? Ima, bezimun sakila. If you're talking about the mother that's there inside the orchard, just by designating it, would that be good enough? Say the malyasaboy. You have to properly trap it. If you didn't trap it, so then it could run away, so it's b'chlal not prepared for Yontif. So how could you say that by the mother, if you're going to prepare it, it's going to be good enough? So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, so Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak gave a different answer. Idi v'idi b'dida. Both brises are speaking about the baby that's born over there in the orchard. And what's the difference between the two brises? Ha begina smucha le'ir. If it's a place, if it's a garden or it's an orchard that's near the city, so Rashi says, because it's near the city, the person is aware that it's there, and he thinks about it, and that machshava, that he's aware of it, that itself is enough that he does not have to do an action to designate it. Because of his das, that he knows that it's there, and he wants it, so therefore it's enough. But but if it's a garden or it's an area, it's an orchard that's not near the city, so even if the animal is stuck there and it can't run away on its own, but nevertheless, if you're not going to do an action, it's not going to be considered designated. So Taisvis here, yeah, but talking, the Vlad, the baby that was born there.
What was the most question? We're going to Enochinami. The Gemara said Enochinami, and that's it.
No, the Braisa doesn't say that though. No, but wait, but the Lashon, just a second, the Lashon of the Braisa before was that you have to do a Maisa to designate it. That's all. The Braisa should have said that you have to trap it. Look before in the first Braisa, the Lashon of the Braisa is that Chayish Akina Bepardes Tzricha Lezamen. Doesn't say tzricha lotzud, tzricha lezamen.
Because he's talking about zimun now.
Okay, so the lashon of the Braisa is mashma that just the zimun alone is good enough. Let me tell you 1 second the shaila of Taisvis here. Taisvis here asks a pashta shaila in the Gemara before the Gemara refuted what Rav Chisda said or what Rabbi Barav Huna said, that you can't compare the fish that are stuck in a canal where you did an action to the animal that's stuck inside a pardes and you did not do an action. Now the Gemara said to Yufta. The Gemara refuted his opinion. But right over here, the Gemara is bringing a steer of two brises, and the Gemara is saying it depends. That there is sometimes that an animal that's there in the pardes, even without an action, it's already designated. So why didn't the Gemara answer that for Rav Chisda before? So Taisvis says that this is a good answer for Stira and Braises. Regarding Tanoim, this always the Gemara makes an akimta to explain what the Tanoim meant to say. When it comes to Rav Chisda or Rabbi Barav Huna, they're Amiroim. And Amiroim have to explain their words much more. And if he didn't explain this detail, so he meant to say that any chaya in any situation, near the city, not near the city, is always considered to be automatically designated. That's why on that, the Gemara said to Yufta, and the Gemara didn't give an answer. Zok the Heilige Mishneh, behema misukenes. If you have an animal that it's about to die, it's in danger, and the person knows it's going to die, so then he won't be able to eat it. He doesn't want to have a loss. So he wants to shecht it on Yontif. Now, what's the problem? So as Rashi here says, he already ate a Suda, he doesn't need it for the Eichel Nefesh of Yontif. So the question is, could he shecht it on Yontif? He's going to shecht it to use the meat for the next day. So it's awesome and atayre to shecht on Yontif like that. So lo yishchait, he's not allowed to shecht it, elam kain, unless yesh shehuz b'yayim, he has enough time in the day, lechol mimena kizayis tzli, that he could eat from it today, a kizayis that's roasted, in other words, even roasted, which takes less time to cook, or it's prepared in a short time, and even just a kizayis, so if you can eat from it a kizayis of tzli, so then you're allowed to shecht it on Yom Tif. Right, so the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch brings this halacha. The Alter Rebbe says that even if you finish your Suda and you're not planning on eating, but just like the Gemara always says, and we paskin like the Indian of Hoyel, that because guests could come and you can share it for those people, so therefore over here, this mission also is based on this halacha of Hoyel. Even if you could just share them with them a kazayis, you're allowed to shecht it on Yom Tov. Rabbi Kiva says, Afil kazayis chai mi beist v'chasa. Even if you don't have time to roast it, even if you just have time to take a kazayis of raw meat and eat it straight out of the place where it was shechted, without cooking it, without doing anything, and the emissaries, the Rishonim, the Mefarshim discuss that this would mean even without melicha. There are certain meats that you can eat just by rinsing it off without doing proper melicha. If you have time to eat it that way, it's allowed to shecht this on Yontif in order that you shouldn't lose the money of this behemoth that's going to die and won't be able to eat it at all. Another halacha regarding shchite shochta basada. If you shechted an animal out in the field and you have to deliver it, bring it back home. Lo yiviyana b'mayt u b'mayta. Don't deliver it back home carrying it on a pole. B'mayta, it's another kind of pole. And the reason is because this is the way it's done during the week. And Rashi says it's a zilzul for the Yom Tif. Aval maybe biyadai evarim evarim. The way you deliver it back to your house from the shlachta is out from the place where you shechted the animal. You bring it one limit at a time. And the morning covered the way proper for Yom Tif. Amar Rami, Dr. Gemara, Amar Rami Barabe. Rami Barabe said, Hefshit v'nituach ba'oila. When it comes to the carbon oila, so you have to flay the animal and you have to cut it into pieces, and that's how it's burnt on the mizbeach. In other words, even though you're going to be burning the entire animal on the mizbeach, so why don't you just bring the whole animal together on the mizbeach? Well, that's not the way it's done. First, you have to flay the animal and cut it into pieces, and then it's brought on the mizbeach. And v'hu adin lekatzavim, the same thing is also by butchers. When they serve the meat, they should first flay it and cut up the pieces, and that's how you serve the food. Mikan limda Torah derecheretz. From here, the Torah is teaching me proper behavior of how you eat. Shelo yochal adam basar. A person should not eat the meat of an animal. Kaidim hefshit v'nituach. Before he flays the animal and cuts pieces of meat, proper pieces, in order to eat from it like a mensch. Sagt the Gemara, my kamashmalan. What was Rami bar Abba teaching me? So the Gemara here now is going to try to suggest that maybe Rami bar Abba wasn't just stam teaching derech eretz, but maybe he was actually teaching a certain chiddush of a halacha. In Hilchas Kashrus, he was teaching me a certain chiddush. So if you're going to say, La fukim b'der Rav Huna, maybe he was coming to exclude from what Rav Huna said. So the point the Gemara is going to say over here is, if you're eating from an animal and you didn't cut up the pieces, you didn't open up the animal, you're not checking to see, to make sure that the animal is not a treifa. You're not doing the proper bedikis that have to be done with an animal. So maybe this is what Rami bar Abba was teaching me over here, that you have to properly check the animal and cut it up into pieces to see if that it's not a treifa before you eat it. And this excludes what Rav Huna said. Because Rav Huna said as follows: Beheme b'chayeha, or beheme when it's still alive, b'cheskas isarei medes. It has a chazakeh of isar. Which chazakeh of what isar? So Rashi says the isar of Eiver min achai. If it's alive, any limb you take off is Eiver min achai, so it has a cheskas isar. Ad sheyivada lacha b'men nishchata. Until you know how it was shechted, that it was shechted properly, and then the cheskas isar is removed. This is Rashi's pshat in the Gemara. Taisus argues on Rashi, because Taisus says the Gemara, the lashon of the Gemara is Achi vadalacha bamen nishchata, until you find out how it was shechted. In other words, was it a kosher shchita? Was it not a kosher shchita? So Taisus says, if the issue was that it had a cheskas issa because of evim and achai, what difference does it make if it was shechted kosher or not? If the abeim is dead, there is no evim and achai anymore. So that's not the cheskas issa we're talking about. Taisus says the cheskas isser is an animal when it's alive has a chazakah that it was shloi nishchata. A cheskas ein azvucha. That's the chazakah of the animal that the Gemara is speaking about. So this is a very fundamental machlokes here between Rashi and Taisus. In the Shef Shmaitze he says that Rashi holds machzikin me isser le isser because it has a chazakah of evim and achai. So even though once the animal is dead, so l'chayre that chazakah is off. But automatically, there's going to be another chazakeh that until you see that it's not shechted k'debai, that it's not shechted properly, so there's going to be a chazakeh that the animal is not yet a kosher animal. Mashenkin Taisus holds, you can't, there's no connection between these two chazakehs. The chazakeh of Evim and Achai and the chazakeh of Ein Zvucha, there's no connection. It's two different things. So therefore, the inyan of Evim and Achai is not negeya here to what the Gemara is speaking about. Okay, then... Evim and Achai. The chazakeh... Taisvis says the chaz. You said the second chazaka. Ein zvucha. That it's like Taisvis, l'chayre like Taisvis, yeah. Then Rav Huna says nishchata. Once the animal was already shechted, so Rav Huna says becheskas heterei medes. Every animal has a chazaka that it's mutter at sheyivadalacha b'men nitrefa, until you find out what the treifa was, until you see there was a treifa. In other words, what this means is most animals are healthy and do not have a treifa in them. So if you shecht an animal and later you see that it had up a hole, it had up a certain treifa, and you don't know when that happened. Did it happen while it was alive? Did it happen later after the shchita? Every animal has a chazakeh that it's not a treifa. That's the fact by most animals. And therefore, according to Rav Huna, you don't have to do any of the bedikis by an animal to check to make sure that it's not a treifa. So maybe Rami Bar Abba was coming to argue with Rav Huna and to say, no, that there is no such a chazaka. And therefore you have to cut up the meat before to see that it's a kosher animal and to be baidik. So now the Gemara brings from our Mishnah, but for Ha'anan Tanan Mas Nisim Ked Rav Huna. But in our Mishnah we learned like Rav Huna, the Tanan, because in the Mishnah it said, Rabbi Akiva said, Afile kezayis chai mi beist v'chosa. Even if you have a kezayis of raw meat and you're eating it directly from the house and the butcher where it was shechted and you didn't do anything else, you didn't cut the animal b'chlal, and you could eat it right away. My love, don't you think the taich of the words of the Mishnah is mi beist v'chosa mamish? You eat it right over there when it was shechted without cutting the animal at all. Like Rav Huna said, because there's a chazakah that the animal is not a treifa. So the Gemara suggests another pshat. Loi, no. The words mi beist v'chosa has a completely different pshat. You can eat from a part in the animal, in other words, the intestines of the animal, where the animal chews and it slaughters and it chews its food. You can eat that part of the animal even without cooking it. That's something that can be eaten raw. But maybe the Mishnah still means that you do have to cut up the animal and to check that it's not a treifa. It's not saying that you can eat it without cutting it at all. But the Gemara says, no, what Rab Chiya said, that the pshat in the Mishnah is, Mokaim tvichosa mamish. You can eat the animal directly there when it was shechted without cutting it, like Rav Huna said. Okay? The Mokum Ashchita, you can eat from the neck of the animal. You can eat, the Mokum Ashchita means from the neck of the animal, the place of the Shchita mamish without any bedika. Elo, sagt the Gemara, Rami Bar Abba, Oirach Are Kamash Malon. So therefore, Rami Bar Abba is not arguing on Rav Huna. He was just telling you the proper behavior, the proper conduct of how a person is going to supposed to eat. That's all he was saying. But he wasn't telling you the halacha when you get to being baidik an animal that it's not a treifa, because you don't have to be baidik. So the Rishayim here say that from our Gemara, the maskana is that when you shecht an animal, you don't have to do any bedikis to make sure that it's not a treifa. But they say that there's one exception, b'negeya to the lungs, the reya. The main bedika that you have to do by an animal is to blow up the lungs or to look to see that the lungs don't have a hole in it. And the difference between this and all the other treifas, there's the yudches treifas, is because all other treifas are not motzi, are not common. So there's a chazakah that the animal is kosher. But when you get to the lungs, it is more common that the lungs should have a hole in it, and therefore that you do have to check. Kedetanya. So we learned in the Beitza, we see that the Tanoim teach you proper behavior, how you eat food. A person shouldn't eat garlic or onions. Rashi, if you look in Rashi, Rashi says tzibala. You shouldn't eat onions meroshai, from the top of it. Ela me'alav. You should eat from the leaves, from the bottom of it. If a person eats from the top, it shows that he can't bother to peel off the leaves. He wants to eat it right away from the top. He doesn't have patience to take off the leaves. So he should eat from the bottom and take off the leaves first. Ve'em achal harei rafsen. If he eats directly from the top without peeling off the leaves, so then he's a rafsen. He's like eating in a way that he's so hungry. He's like eating in not in a menschliche manner. A similar thing. You're drinking a cup of water or whatever it is, don't drink it all down at once in one gulp. If you do drink it all at once, you're a garganon, you're a guzzler, you're drinking in such a way, it's not proper behavior. A person that drinks all in one shot, so then he's a gargaron. Shnayim, if you drink it with 2 sips, derech eretz. That's proper behavior with the way you drink. Shloisha, if you drink it once, twice, and the third time, migasi ruach. That's already hoary behavior. Rami Bar Abba said, the Gemara is bringing this here because it's the same Amayra, Rami Bar Abba, and he said other things. So Rami Bar Abba said, Chatzuva. Chatzuva, Rashi says, is a kind of plant that, unlike all other plants or all other trees, the roots spread out. This chatzuva, the roots do not spread out. The roots just go straight down, all the way down where it's growing. It doesn't go to any sides. So this Chatzuva, Rashi says, when Yeshua conquered Eretz Yisrael and he divided the portions of the places where the Yidden had and the Shvatim, so he planted this Chatzuva as a marker for the borders, to know exactly where the borders are. So this Chatzuva, Mikateya Ragleyan Derishia, it cuts off the feet of the Rishayim that go and move away the border and they go into their friend's territory. So this Chatzuva shows them, we can see exactly where the border is, and therefore it cuts off their feet. Netiyah, when you have a young tree that grows, and this refers to the halacha of Arla, that the Torah says that you have to wait 3 years until you can eat from a tree. Mekateya ragleyoin, the katzvia, this cuts off the feet of those butchers that don't have the patience to go and check to see that the animal that they shechted is not a treifa, and people that don't have the patience to wait until it's allowed for them to have the relations with their wife. So you learn this out from this concept of Arla, that you have to have the patience to wait until the time when it's mutter. Turmis, Rashi says, is a kind of bean that is very bitter, and the only way you can eat this bean is when you cook it 7 times. It's cooked very well. Afterwards it becomes sweetened and you're able to eat it. So this bean, Mekateya Ragleya the Senein Shal Yisrael, this cuts off the feet of the haters of Yidden, which is a euphemism referring to Yidden. And why is this? Because Shenemar, here you have a pasuk where it talks about Yidden that served Avodah Zarah. And it says here in this pasuk 7 different Avodah Zarahs that the Yidden served. Vayesifu b'nei Yisrael lasas hara b'nei Hashem. Vayavdu es ha'ba'alim, v'sa'ashtares, v'selei Aram, v'selei Tzidon, v'selei Moya, v'selei b'nei Ammon, v'selei Plishtim. 7 different Avodah Zarahs. Vayazvu es Hashem. They left the Eibishter v'lo yavdu. So unlike the Tormison, after the Tormison is cooked once, it's cooked another time, finally it becomes sweet. Here, Rashi says the Eibishter punished the Yidden for serving Avodah Zarah once, twice, and even after 7 times, they still didn't learn from all the punishment and they served Avodah Zarah. Now the Gemara adds another pshat. It said there in the pasuk, V'lo yavdu, it finished off. Mimashma shenema vayazvus Hashem. The pasuk says that they left the Eibishter. Eini yedeya shelo yavdu. So do I not know that they did not serve the Eibishter? Ma tamad loima v'lo yavduhu. What does it mean when it says they didn't serve the Eibishter? So Gemara brings another pshat. Amar Rabbi Lazar said, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Eibishter says, Afila keturmis hazeh. Even like this bean, sheshoken ois sheva pamim, that you cook it 7 times, and then you can eat it, and it becomes sweet, it becomes like a dessert. Lo yasunu asuni banai. My children didn't treat me that way. So according to this pshat of Rabbi Lazar, the Tormus refers to the Eibishter. According to the previous pshat, the Tormus refers to Yidden, that the Eibishter Kaviyachal cooked the Yidden, the Eibishter punished the Yidden, and they didn't learn from the punishment. According to this pshat, the Tormus is a mashal on the Eibishter, that the Yidden did not. The Yidden tried one Avodah Zarah, another Avodah Zarah, 7 different Avodah Zarahs they tried. And then after that, they should have came to the Emes, they should have came to the Eibishter, and they still didn't learn, and they didn't come to the Eibishter himself. Sagt the Gemara, Tana Mishmei Rab Meir. They learned in the name of Rab Meir. Mipnei ma nitna Torah li Yisrael. Why was the Torah given to Yidden? Mipnei shein azim. Because the Yidden are very stubborn. And the Eibishter gives the Yidden the Torah in order to subdue them and to take away their stubbornness. Tana de Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel dashed this in a pasuk. It says, Miminoi, from the Eibishter's right hand, Eish da Slamai. The Eibishter gives the Torah that's a fiery Torah. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Eibishter says, Ru'uyin alalu shetinasen lehem das eish. That the Yidden are worthy that they should be given this Torah, which is fiery, in order to calm down, in order to subdue their stubbornness. Ikedamri. Others say that the pshat over here, how you read the Mimina Eish Das Lamai is, Daseyem Shel Elu, that the behavior of the Yidden is Eish, is very fiery. Shel Male Nitne Torah li Yisrael. If not for the fact that the Eibishter gave Torah to Yidden and it subdues them, En Kol Uma V'Loshen Yecholen Lamed B'fneim. There would be no nation that could stand up against Yidden because of the strong will, of the stubbornness of Yidden. And v'haina dam Rab Shimon ben Lakish. This is also what Rab Shimon ben Lakish said. Gimel Azenheim. There are 3 that are very strong-willed, that are very stubborn. Yisrael b'umais, the Yidden amongst the nations. Kelev b'chayis, the dog amongst the animals. And Tarnagel b'oifis, and the chicken amongst the birds. V'yeshaimrim, and others add and say, Af eiz b'behema, also a goat amongst the animals, behema daka that is, amongst the small livestock. And v'yeshaimrim, and others say, Af tzlaf b'ilonis. Also the tzlaf, which is a caper bush amongst the trees, is also very stubborn. So Rashi here says he doesn't know what the stubbornness of this tzlaf is, but Tosfos says that the stubbornness is because the Gemara says in a few places that this tzlaf has a lot of different things that grows in it. There's berries, there's fruits, and then there's even the other parts of the tree that are fit to eat. You can eat a lot, and it gives fruits every single day. So it's a very strong, powerful tree. Another thing Tosfos brings over here, that this kafrisen is part of, you make from the ketores. The yank kafrisen comes from this tree, and has a very, very strong, potent smell, and therefore it's called the azen in the trees. It's a very strong tree. The next halacha, it said in the Mishnah, shochte basada lo yiviyana b'moit, that if a person is shechting out in the field, he should not bring it back into the house carrying it on a pole. Tana Rabbanon, we learned a similar halacha in a Beitza. Ein asume yoytze b'makle. A person that's blind should not go out using a stick to be able to go out. And Rashi again says the reason is because this is the way it's done during the week, and it's a zilzul for yontif. The Rishonim say we're not talking about a person that's blind that can't walk without a stick to be able to walk outside. He could walk without it, but it helps him. It helps him to be able to go, and therefore, because this is done in the weekday this way, so it's a zilzul, and you're not allowed to do this on Yom Tov. And v'loya roya b'tarmiloi, a shepherd that has a certain pouch that he usually carries with him, he should not carry with him this weekday pouch on Yom Tov. Then yaitzen b'kisei, and you also don't go out with this chair that you carry a person on this chair. So you don't carry out a person this way on Yom Tov. Echad ish ve'echad isha, whether it's a man or a woman. Fragt the Gemara, Eini, is this true? V'hoshalach Rav Yaakov Baridi. But Rav Yaakov Baridi sent the following report. Zoken echadai b'shchunaseinu, there was an older individual in our neighborhood. V'hayoytze beglutki shaloi, and he would go out with a glutki. Rashi says that the glutki is a folding chair. They would carry him on it. Uba v'shalus Rabbi Shua ben Levi, and they came and they asked Rabbi Shua ben Levi if this is allowed. And v'amar, and he said, Im rabim tzrichim loi mutter. Since he was going, the Zokim was going to the Bismedrish to give a shiur, and they carried him for that purpose, so it's allowed. And V'som Chorabiseinu, and our Rebbes relied al divrei Achi Shakya, on the words of Achi Shakya that said, the Omar, Ano afikte Rav Hune, I carried out Rav Hune, mehini l'shili, from hini to shili, or meshili lihini, and back from shili to hini. I carried him on this shiur on Yontif. V'omer Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, and Rav Nachman by Yitzchak said, Ano afikte l'mar Shmuel, I took out Shmuel, mishimsha l'tula, from the sun into the shade, and mitula l'shimsha, from the shade into the sun. On Yontif, he carried him out on this shiur. So you see over here that this is allowed in Yontif. So how does it say in the Beitza that it's not allowed? So the Gemara answers, Hasam kidama timer. The reason why it's allowed is like it says over here, the reason that they said, Im hayorabim tzrichim loy mutter. If it's a case where it's someone that was coming, if he's coming to give a shiur, or someone that the rabbim needs him, only then is it allowed. Amalei Rav Nachman, L'chama bar Ada, Shliach Tzion. Rav Nachman said, L'chama bar Ada, Shliach Tzion, it means, Rashi says, he used to go up to Yerushalayim very often. Kisalkis lahasam. When you go up to Eretz Yisrael, Akev vizil asul miditzur, make a detour and go on the mountain by Tzur, and vizil legabei the Rav Yaakov Baridi, and go to Rav Yaakov Baridi, ubayimene, and ask him this question, Kasa or Kisa, that is, Ma atum bei. What do you hold about this halacha of the chair? If it's a case where Rabbim tzrichim loy, are you allowed to carry someone on this chair?
From shade to sun is not Rabbim tzrichim loy.
Apparently it was a case where they were Rabbim tzrichim loy. That's what he's saying now. Ad ozal lahasam. So by the time he got there to Eretz Yisrael, noch nafshe the Rav Yaakov Baridi. Rav Yaakov Baridi already passed away. So Kisalik, he came up there in Eretz Yisrael, Ashkechei la Rab Zrike. So he found instead Rab Zrike. Amalei, he said to Rab Zrike, Kisei ma'atem bei. What's your opinion about the chair on Yom Tov? Amalei, so he answered him, Hochi omer Rabami. So Rabami said, you can carry on the chair, but ubulvat shelo yikatif. As long as when you carry on the chair, you carry him in your hands, the way you regularly can carry a chair, but not placing on your shoulders. Rashi says, if you put your hands on your friend's shoulders, and your friend puts his hands on your shoulders, and you place the chair in there, that's something that's done for a longer distance, and that's something which is more of a weekday kind of activity, and that's something that is not allowed to be done. That's what he answered him. So the Gemara explains, what does this mean that you shouldn't put it on the shoulders? Amar Rav Yosef b'rei derave ba'alunki. Alunki, as I explained, when you put your hands on the shoulders and you place the chair on the shoulders, that's the way it's not allowed to be done. Fragt the Gemara, Eini, is this true? But Rav Nachman, Shorele, Le Yalte, Le Meitbak Alunki. Rav Nachman allowed Yalte, which was his wife, that she was carried out on this alunki, even a chair that's placed on the shoulders. So the Gemara answers, Yalte de Beitza. Again, Shani Yalte de Beitza. In the case with his wife, Yalte is different because she was afraid to be carried in any other way. She was afraid that she might fall if she's not positioned properly on their shoulders, so therefore that's allowed. And the Taisus over here says, so what if she's afraid? But didn't we say before that it's only if it's a tzorech harabim, are you allowed to carry anybody on a chair on Yontif? So Yalta, even if she's afraid, how is she allowed to be carried at all on this chair? So Taisus says, so we must say that there was also a case where the rabbim needed her. It was Shabbos or Reish HaGoyla. It was Kapanim. Taisus says, again? Oh, sorry, again. Shabbos Reish HaGoyla Isa, because she was the daughter of the Reish HaGoyla, so therefore the rabbim needed her also for whatever purpose. Okay. Ameimer u'mazutre, Ameimer and mazutre, mechatfi luhu b'shabbat de rigla. So they would carry them also, not stam on a chair, but on the shoulders. They would carry them on the Shabbos, on Yom Tov, when there was a special shiur that they had to come and give in the Bismedrash. They would carry them. Mishum bi'asusa, because they were afraid to be carried in any other way. And again, this was Rabbim Tzrichim Loi. Va'amrillah, others say, Mishum duchke de tzibura, because there was such a big crowd of people and they were all standing and they were waiting until he's going to be brought to his place to sit down. So therefore they brought him quickly on the chair so everybody could sit down and shouldn't have to wait for them.